Hi, everybody. I am Sue Hillyard, and I'm here with Rav Chahal, and we are doing our next episode of Astro Coffee, our up close and personal interviews with yours and our favorite astrologers. Hey, Rav.
Hey, how are you, Sue?
Too much coffee, too much Mercury retrograde.
Yeah.
And today we are both, Rob and I are absolutely thrilled that our interviewee today is Patricia Walsh. Patricia has written a book that was very influential to me, understanding karmic complexes. Easy for
There
me
it
to
is.
say. There you go. And is also the chief trainer for deep memory process, past life regression, that was started by Roger Woolger. And welcome, Patricia. We are so happy to have
Hello.
you.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah,
Good to see you both.
let's see. Why don't we, I guess we could just jump in. Patricia has been very gracious in allowing us to display her chart as we talk to her about her astrological influences. So here it is. So Patricia, let's start off with what drew you to astrology, and then kind of show us in your chart how that shows.
Okay. Well, I remember learning how to actually cast charts with an ephemerae when I was, gosh, I don't even remember how old I was. I know it was like, I don't know, I was in my teens somewhere. And I also always say that I remember getting the book, what was that, Sue Goodman, the
Linda
only
Goodman.
you'll ever need. I don't remember the author, but it was called The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need. And I mean, it did. It had all the it wasn't really, but it was all the calculations and houses. So I learned all that, and I, would draw the charts. And then I remember being absolutely excited to find blank charts that you could actually draw into. I mean, this is before Amazon, and you could just look online and download stuff and print it.
And computer software.
Yeah, exactly. It was before software. So what I first found fascinating, I think to me, my draw was certainly psychology and the view of like a view into the human psyche or the person I was looking at, whatever, to understand them more. The thing that came out of that for me during that time in my life was, I have Saturn conjunct my South node. So there's a tendency to, has been a tendency to, see the world through my own lens. Some might call it judgment, right? With Virgo, Pisces, Virgo, Pluto and Virgo, etc. And what, I mean, I had an incredible amount of naivete when I was younger too. So I would always get taken by surprise by these aspects of people that I didn't see, because I was a little bit Pollyanna. So what astrology did for me early on was I was able to see this objectivity, which really spoke to me, in that everybody is perfect as they are, that there's a divine plan for everyone. And that was like so relieving to me, so inspiring to me, so so much that I could just be like, oh wow, this person is perfect as they are. Now let's find out what makes them tick. And it was that relativity and objectivity that really turned me on. And I'm sure, my Aquarius South Node in the 11th, and I know now several hundred of my own past lives, I had early involvement in astrology But interestingly, my earliest memories, or not my earliest memories, some of my past life memories with that was Chaldean. And astrology was used in maybe different ways than the way we do it today. But the point was that, sure, any system, I think esoteric system, I always had a wild interest in. So astrology totally fit there. And then, of course, the caveat I always say is, and then I started with all the psychological astrologers, Liz Greene, Sasportas. I was also into esoteric astrology because I had kind of voraciously read the Theosophical works that Alice Bailey put out. That was a foundation of my, my actual spiritual. I always say I cut my teeth on Seth and the Jane Roberts Seth books and Alice Bailey Theosophy. And that was also in my 20s, so on. So does that answer your question? Oh, and I was going to say an esoteric astrology, which also was some of the early the Bailey stuff and Alan Leo, etc.
Yes, that absolutely answers it. And then you kind of you eventually trained with Jeffrey Wolf Greene, correct?
That's when I said, well, I always tell the story that, I started with the only astrology book you'll ever need. And then when I came across Pluto in the early 90s, when I was living in Germany at the time, I said, now this is the only astrology book you'll ever need, because it really combined everything that was my passion, the whole focus of looking into the soul, into, all of the conditioning and karmas and complexes and and from that level, what makes a person tick. Because even in psychology, I was only ever interested in transpersonal views of psychology. Even though I did study Freud and stuff like that as foundational, but the transpersonal was always interesting to me.
And then that led you to writing your own book about the karmic complexes.
Right.
And I know I've heard you tell the story about having having piles of astrology charts around you, and was it Roger telling you ought to write a book?
No, it was so I was preparing for one of my first lectures. So one of the things, you want to talk karma and astrology, and I see, we had you sent me an email where you had looked up, interestingly, these progressed transits of karma, right?
Yes.
And that natally karma conjuncts my Mars, which makes total sense, because I do find that, outside of the major asteroids, the named asteroids play out very literal. I have a lot of examples of them in my chart that played out just really literally. And so it makes sense that, I have a balsamic Pluto Mars, right, which is a finishing signature. I have 0-degree nodes. That's also a finishing signature. And I have karma in my natal chart conjunct the Mars. So it would make sense that, this life is one dedicated about cleaning up mine. And of course, with all that Virgo, I love cleaning up messes. Right? So it's mine and other people's messes. I mean, really, I just love it.
We resonate. We're Virgos here.
Pluto Uranus is balsamic, right, for liberation, to liberate. So that's been my experience with it. I'm sorry, your original, I went off in a little thought stream there. What was your original question? Maybe you forgot too.
I don't remember. But I was looking at the Virgo Pisces,
Yeah.
The original question was about your how you came to write the Karmic Complexes book.
Right. So I studied with Jeffrey and I studied with Roger. I was already teaching with Roger in regression and deep memory process. And okay, so I have this terrible fear of public speaking. And I can give you chart signatures for that, but it was a prevalent thing in my life. And a lot of people have it. But here I was, teaching with this master of deep memory process. And I would find that what would happen to me was, because the workshops we do are 5-day trainings, as you know, and they're 2 years with the same students. So you get a comfort level that's different than standing up and orating, right? And you're kind of sitting on the floor in a circle. So I was fine speaking like that. But at one point during the training, and this actually happened with Roger sitting next to me, one point during the training, when the group would turn around and somebody would ask me a question and everybody would be looking at me, I would leave my body. And like this heat flash would come around me. It was so somatic once that I'm sitting there, Roger sitting next to me, it happened, I dissociated, this heat flash came around and Roger leaned over and he said, "What was that?" He felt it.
Wow.
It was like literal, this is before I was hot flashing. That turned out to be a story of being burned. Stories, right? Not even, the crazy witchcraft. I mean, there was more to the story there. But the reason why that all matters is because all around that time, as that story was cooking in me, as that story was cooking in me, the affect was so strong, I got asked to go give this lecture at the Connecticut Astrological Association. And I have a theory in my life that says, feel the fear and do it anyway, right? I had already talked to people about, how to beef up my confidence in public speaking, et cetera, et cetera. And none of that was going to work because it was this underlying story as well as several others I had already worked with, but this is the one that clinched it. So this Connecticut Association calls me to do this thing. And I'm on the phone with them and they said, "Well, would you come in?" And I go, "Sure, Mars and Leo. Sure, Sag. Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. I'll do it." And then I said, "So about how many people you think you usually get for a turnout?" And they said, "Oh, it'll be like 60 to 100. The room started spinning. As they said that, I'm on the phone, the room started spinning. I got weak in the knees. I felt like I was going to throw up. And I went, "Okay, we'll talk later, bye." And then I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so triggered," right? So of course I did the typical Virgo thing, which is go into over prep mode and over preparation. So I pulled out all of these files and blah, blah, blah. And I had them all on my table. And I was living with Roger at the time. We shared a house and a practice as professional partners. And he trots by to get his morning tea one morning as I'm looking frantically through all my cases that I'm going to present. And he goes, "What's that there?" And I said, "Oh, I'm prepping for a lecture." And he goes, "Well, offhandedly, you have enough material for a book there." And I literally went boing, because what I had been doing up until that point is because I was so fascinated with the whole system of evolutionary astrology and people's literal past lives, that every client I regressed, every student we had in the program, their clients, their students, I had thousands, tens of thousands, probably 5,000 to 7,000 of these case studies, where I'd have the chart and I'd write the story on the back of the chart.
Wow.
And that was kind of how I was really learning how the archetypes express themselves in past lives. Furthermore, what I really saw through all of that, my own fascination, was that the way that Jeffrey describes the karmic axis is so literal in past lives that there isn't any other system that ever hit it like he did, especially when there's a square to the nodes, because I could clearly see that in people's charts through series of regressions where they would do one side, like let's imagine I had a square to my nodes. And some people might include Venus, although it hasn't necessarily shown up that way in my regressions. But let's assume, right, I had a square there, that I would show up lives that were very, Aquarius 11th house and Leo 5th house, Aquarius, and they would be very distinct in the kinds of complexes and situations and so on and so forth, archetypally. And I saw that so clearly with clients and students, et cetera, that I was like, wow, this Jeffrey really nailed it. This understanding that both nodes can be part of the past life when it's squared in the squaring planet, and then the rulers, all of the extensions and special conditions that we understand in evolutionary astrology. So before that lecture, wait, it gets better. Let me finish the story. Lecture, Roger, he traveled a lot, I traveled a lot. Sometimes we were just ships passing in the night. He was on his way off to go somewhere. And I'm preparing for my lecture. So I have my final cases, and I'm coming down the stairs with this pile in front of my face, boing, 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 boing. And there's 2 steps on the landing that I forgot were there or whatever. I landed like I was going to, land on the floor, and I didn't, and I landed on the side of my ankle and cracked it. I heard it crack when I hit the ground. And when Roger was in the office and he heard me, and he came running over. And of course, we did some trauma work right there, because I was like, I heard it crack. I couldn't breathe. The interesting thing was I didn't feel the ankle as much as I couldn't breathe. And it wasn't that the wind was knocked out of me, some of it's shock, but this was the affect that was arising. It was like I couldn't, like this. Anyway, brought me to the hospital. I had to have a cast put on. It was fractured, blah, blah. And then I said, so Roger, so they get the cast. I'm in the car going home, and he goes, we got to get that story. We got to get to that story. This is the one that, and I said, I know. I'm like, I'm so triggered. You could have regressed me on the gurney. So we go home, literally, I lay on the couch and bang, I go right into the story. And I was just this young girl who lived in some, puritanical, whatever kind of village. And the back of the story is that, anyway, when past lives surface, they don't always surface in sequential, like you can go into a moment and then go back and forward. And maybe I'll start there, because the moment I went in was exactly this. I'm in the fire, I can't breathe, and there's all these eyes looking at me.
Oh, wow.
My
all of
body.
the elements.
Everything was there. It was right there. And I just left my body, because you dissociate when you're in that much trauma. And I just left my body. Backstory was I was some young girl. And speaking of Jupiter and Pisces and the Virgo Pisces stuff, and I just was very fantastical. And I told stories, and I think I talked to spirits and other worldly beings and whatever I was doing. And they were trying to find a reason to off me. But what really was happening was that my father, who was a minister or priest of some kind, some clergyman, was abusing me. And I think I got pregnant, and he had to get rid of me. So they used this as this kind of weird child thing, to burn me, basically, to purge and clean the village of whatever satanic influences I was under. And that was where this whole speaking up, blah, blah. And that one clinched it, because literally the weirdest thing was I went to go give that lecture. The first blessing was that I was in a wheelchair. I was in a walking cast, but it was a non-weight bearing cast at first. So I got to sit down. So that was the first thing. I didn't have to stand at the podium and give the lecture. And the second thing that was so weird was I'm in my wheelchair, and I look in the room before, I go in, and some thought popped into my head that was not my thought. I swear to God, it said, this room is mine for the next 2 hours. And I went, what? because that's so not, because my face would get me the hell out of here. And I had a great time. And the whole time I was pinching myself, like going, is this you? Like, how are you so grounded and not dissociated and freaking out? You know? And that actually, that whole surprise at the abject shift in my life from that moment, it stayed with me for like a year, because then I was lecturing all over astrology world, and then I wrote the book, and then I was lecturing everywhere. But like for a year, I'd be like, why am I not afraid of this? So yeah, that's the story.
Wow.
Collected
That's
a bunch
fascinating.
I talked to Jeffrey. So I was in Jeffrey's last training in Sedona. He gave the very last live training he did. And I talked to him on a break, and I said, you know, I've been collecting these stories and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, yes, do it. I've been waiting for someone to write that book. So there you go.
And here we are, and it has changed so many. I mean, it totally, I'm totally serious when I say it really changed my life, because it made me, it brought me more into evolutionary astrology, and it decided me to do the DMP training, which I mean, it has been a total, you know, life changer.
Yeah, well, you have those
yeah.
kinds of stories too, right? Where you laid down on the mat one person and sat up, and you were totally different 2 hours later.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
oh.
Yes. Yes. And witnessed so many of them too.
Yeah.
You know, which, you know, brings it all home that it's amazing. Well, I love that story, and it kind of brought to life your Mars and Leo, eh?
In what way?
In that, the fire story, and
Oh yeah,
the no fear, and I'm going for it, and
yeah.
this
Well,
room
that
is
would
mine.
be the leading edge, right? Like the desire is to get over it, right? Like, yeah, I mean, Leo, I remember when Jeffrey read my chart for me for the first time, and he said, your soul created this is as I was still going through this deep healing deconditioning process, you know. And he said, your soul created maximum freedom in this lifetime. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know about that. You know what I mean? Because I felt so racked with those typical Pluto, Virgo in the 6th house, you know, anxieties and angst and, you know, all that stuff. And I remember, you know, I'd look at my chart and go, I have a Leo North node, and its ruler is conjunct the MC in Sag, trined by Mars. It's like, could you ask for a better, like, when am I ever going to step into that? I mean, I did. I would look at it, go, when is that going to be my reality?
Yeah. Is that my story?
I know. I'm like, what? I mean, guess that is part of what I'm sure he was referring to when he read my chart a million years ago.
Yeah, he could see it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I just want to add something.
Sure.
Just going back to Patricia, you mentioned, you know, how it linked to past lives, that karmic axis. I have to admit, I was drawn to evolutionary astrology when I read about the south node and the north node of the moon, how the south node of the moon was very much the past story we've brought forward. And, you know, because I have an interest in past lives, past life regression. And one of the authors that I was first ever drawn to was Dr. Brian Weiss, his books and his field of studies and in things. And then just studying evolution astrology, reading the Pluto books. And when I came across karmic complexes, it literally was like, wow. It literally, you know, the whole, like you said, the birth chart depicts a story, especially the nodal axis, the karmic axis that we have. And yeah, 100%, if no one's read your book, I'll be surprised if they haven't. If you're into evolutionary astrology, it's such a great tool and resource just to see how literal life can be. You know, you spoke about how psychology was very much an interest. Your third house is, you know, Taurus ruled, where the ruler of that is Venus in Scorpio in the 8th house. You can't get that double signature of, you know, where your values are aligned to the deep undercurrent, how people operate, why these
Yeah.
experiences, why these, emotions are coming up for certain people. So yeah, very much your soul's map this beautifully to, like you said, that final hurdle. Let's heal the past, because going forward, it's just going to be more acceleration,
Yeah.
stepping up on the soul's growth.
Yeah.
And
Thank
that's
you.
even
Yeah.
the website for the DMP is Heal the Past. I love it.
That is
Yes.
fun. Yes. And I'm working on a podcast now.
Oh,
lovely.
Finally. That's
tell us
a whole
about
new-
that.
Well, it's
if
not
you'd like to.
astrology. I'm actually, because for the last, like, I don't know, 15 years more, almost, yeah, 15 years. Not that I've been teaching DMP and it is my main practice. I do a lot more. I always said that astrology as a practicing astrologer, was going to be my retirement plan, because I always said that, when I can still wrestle people on the mat and actually heal the complexes rather than discuss them or, chip away at them through cognitive means, that I would rather move the complex rather than describe it. So, and I'm not saying that's all that evolutionary astrology does, because I have more to say on that, because I know you can actually move a lot of complexes in a variety of ways using evolutionary astrology. But based on what we were saying with the, Sjoo's experience in regression, my experience in regression, to literally have somebody lay down on your mat and 2 hours later, the complex is just like, they're like, where to go, right? I mean, that's pretty magical. So yes, I've been dedicating that in my private practice and teaching, of course, but a lot of my public speaking and a lot of my other teaching with Soulwise, etc., is astrology. So now I'm like, I really want to focus a lot on the general public and the heal the past material, right? And so that's what the podcast is. It'll be more about that.
So is it going to be
perfect timing?
Yeah.
So it's perfect timing with Pluto transiting Aquarius as well through your 11th house.
The technology, but
yeah.
Also when Sjoo pointed out the karma thing, I thought that was interesting too. She pointed out the karma asteroid.
So shall we let's look at this chart too. Okay, first, I was going to go to your progressions, but before that, a little preface is that I noticed that the recent new moon was 12 Leo conjunct the north node of Neptune. And I thought, wow, what does that say about, what's going on in the world and where we're headed and the opportunities that we have? So if you guys want to say a little bit about that, and then we'll move on to your progress chart, because it figures heavily in your chart.
Yeah, with the new moon, I'm going to look at that as a fleeting, it's a monthly cycle, right? So, I think there's larger trends going on that speaks to, not necessarily the best side of Neptune. The misinformation and how people get stirred up around it. The public is often associated with the moon. And the feeling of that, and then also, disinformation, etc. So, and that's, on consensus level. It doesn't mean that there's not also those positive expressions of seeking inspiration or seeking, right? Like the kind of, I think we all not all of us, but I'm sure some people in the US feel a little bit of a breath of fresh air with the possibility of our upcoming elections. And I'm going to say for myself that I am biased, and I'm
right there with you.
Yeah, it's okay. We have our preferences, we have our choices. My choice is I'm happy now that there's life back in the Democratic Party. Not that I totally identify with all of that stuff. But the point is, it matters for the country.
Yeah, we have a little bit of hope.
Mm.
Yeah. It's just to
Okay.
add to that,
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
just to add to that, just a quick comment is, that the new moon, like for me, well, of course, it's always about the new beginnings, new opportunities that are going to come up over the next couple of weeks. But if the ruler of that, the new moon, it was that Mars in Gemini, and it's kind of like the duality that everyone's experiencing and going through in terms of, the actions that people need to take, because, there is always that duality in terms of which you're going to go towards fear, you're going to go towards love. And for me, this new moon is very much pointing towards looking at one's creative purpose, being able to actualize, through their own soul journey, their soul experience, and wherever this transit was moving through the natal birth chart, just gives you more insight into where the soul wants to step into. And, we were looking at earlier, Sue and I, and where it fell in for Patricia. And it was fascinating that with even this new moon. So do you have the chart of the new moon? And we didn't, we did. It's the outer ring, isn't it?
This one, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It was
So-
that Mars in Gemini that I saw for Patricia moving over her natal moon in the third
Oh,
house.
yeah.
Exact. Well, just gone over. But it's interesting you mentioned the podcasting, communicating, it's kind of taking action in terms of.
Yeah. Well, I've been, I wanted to write a book to the general public for a while. And then, I had to kind of go through a period of maybe that's not the direction, but then the kind of slump that comes with giving up something. We have to go through those phases of gestation and birth and, also feeling fallow, right? When the fields go fallow and, all of that. So I kind of had to go through a bit of a process with that, but then kind of came out the other side, said, wait a minute, the people I want to reach really in more for DMP, the deep memory process and the regression stuff, are the Pluto Scorpios, Pluto Libras, and they're not really reading books much anymore. So, there we go, right?
Yeah, so
Trust me, Pluto Libras will be needing it because we're all going through our Uranus oppositions at the minute as
Yes.
well. So
Yeah.
So is this, when are you going to launch the podcast?
Oh, I've still got a lot of episodes to record because I was doing my intros and, writing some outlines and things like that. So I've already done my design and I've done been doing a lot of the back technology stuff, getting it set up and getting the right equipment and getting my logo and, setting up my host, and I'm redoing my website. So there's been a lot of that, and then some recording and playing with editing, audio editing, which I have to say, I've gotten pretty good at it.
Awesome.
At least so far. And so I'm not sure when it's going to launch. I don't have a deadline for myself because I really want to have a bunch of episodes in the can before I launch it.
Oh, okay. That awesome. So what we were referring to was the not only the Mars, conjunct your Gemini moon, which is perfect, but also this new moon is conjunct your progressed Mars and progressed asteroid Karma, which,
Right.
Reference our previous conversation about, that you were talking about having the Mars and Karma conjunction in your birth chart. And here we have this progression coming, bringing to fruition your
Yeah, well, it's moved, right? So Karma's orbital cycle is, I would assume it's.
I don't know exactly, but I would assume it may be 4 years, like some of the other asteroids.
Right. It's Kuiper Belt. I'm not sure which one it's in, but
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Yeah. So basically then, well, that could be balsamic then, that phase, right? If karma is that slow an orbital
Yeah.
period. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Closing of a cycle.
Mm. Or it may be new phase. We don't know.
Well, yeah, yeah. You mean the transiting
Yeah.
karma? Yeah. Yes. Well, I suspect that it's that it's coming around to a conjunction again, because what my observation in watching it is it moves around the zodiac, in a timely, it's not slow like chaos, which has moved 90 degrees in 75 years, but I suspect it may be one of the ones that takes about 4 years to go around.
Mm.
Yeah. So yes, I find it fascinating that that this, it's a culmination. I mean, with the new moon, it's like giving it a little kickstart, bringing a little shine to the
Yeah.
to the Leo Mars. And the other thing that kind of struck me is that this year we're going to have a Mars, your Mars is retrograde by progression, and this year we're going to have a Mars retrograde in Leo. It won't get quite up to your progressed or natal Leo before it goes retrograde this time, and it'll retrograde back into Cancer, but then it'll go back over your North Node, and yeah, so it definitely a creative boon.
Yeah.
Creative, yeah.
But of course, I'm doing all the sixth house Virgo stuff first, right? I mean, I always
Exactly.
used to laugh about that Mars and Leo. That was like, I used to say, I'm like, so like, I'm highly neurotic and I get to be proud of it.
Oh, I love it. Well,
Yes,
Rob, where would
it's
you like to go
amazing.
with questions
I was
now?
about to say, yeah, it's amazing how like literal the birth chart can just be from experiences and the planets, planetary movements, whether it's planets or asteroids, and it's yeah, we could just do this for hours, couldn't we? Just looking at all the patterns in what you can decipher.
Well, another one
Yeah.
that's really interesting in my chart is the Gemini moon, and I was adopted, right? So I have the classic orphan signature, which is Pluto Uranus square moon. So I'm a Hades moon, right? Chiron square, Jupiter square, and moon in Gemini in the third. So I have two mothers, right? I mean, it's pretty literal.
Right.
You
That
can't
is,
make it
yes.
up.
Well,
Oh,
and
fascinating.
a little kind of aside from that is also that this Gemini moon is conjunct one of the royal stars,
Oh, right. Right.
Aldebaran, which
Yeah.
is coincidentally has just risen back into visibility.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Yeah. So yes, so so what I wanted to ask you next, Patricia, was astrology's become very popular over the last few years. Like a lot of people have started doing astrology, studying astrology. What advice would you give to anyone wishing to step into astrology?
Well, so when you say astrology's become really popular, because I'm out at a lot of the conferences, what I see is a large interest with the younger generations in the classical and Hellenistic. I don't know if I can give advice to those types of readings as much as because you know, from evolutionary astrology, we come from a psychological perspective. And a lot of the approach that you use with somebody, at least my advice in using astrology in that way, is to use therapeutic guidelines when you're using a chart in context with looking at somebody psychologically and opening up things and discussing things with somebody, is to have your feet somewhat grounded in even basic therapeutic context. So I'm not sure if that applies so much with Hellenistic, but what I would say is that anybody in astrology should learn to listen more, that it isn't a performance. And I think that that's also a thing that newer astrologers get stuck with, that, you know, somebody's going to show up, but I have to give them lots of information because I'm on and I have to perform. And I don't blame them. I'm not, you know, because that is oftentimes an unspoken expectation, right? The client comes, if you're talking general public, right? The general public can have a wide variety of ways that they see astrology, with a lot of unspoken expectations of what an astrologer is. You know, to some people, they're a sage, to others, they're a mystic, to some, they're hairdresser that they're going to tell their secrets to, right? You know, it's predictive, right? So, and all of those things are in the collective general public, so they could be coming for a variety of reasons. So I think for anybody is an astrologer, if you're going to come out professionally, is be clear about what your specialty is, and that you have managed expectations by explaining exactly how you work, because that also helps potential clients understand, is this the person for me? But it also helps that professional astrologer, or soon to be professional astrologer, with managing their own, how do I present information to this person? What are they actually looking for? Am I actually the right person for them? And then I think that when you hit that spot with somebody, when that like basic prerequisite is met, there's just that magical flow. And that's where I think as astrologers, we want to be. We want to be in that space of, you know, this person has come to me because I am the person that has something to offer them specifically because of what they're looking for. And so it's a little bit like a match, you know, a nice match met on basic shared values, right? And then you can kind of flow from there. So I think that that's important. I mean, there's a lot of things I could say about a practice of astrology and the ethics that are necessary, that I feel, to do astrology professionally. But
I agree.
Definitely. And, you know, what you're saying kind of makes me reflect on Pluto moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. And I have seen kind of correlations of the, you know, the rise of Hellenistic astrology with Pluto and Capricorn. Do you see that and think that maybe there may be a wider audience, you know, more, well, and also to kind of go backwards, you know, the rise of psychological astrology with Pluto and Scorpio, you know, so how do you see or do you see any changes with Pluto going into Aquarius?
well, it can go either way. So I know years ago at NORWAC, Mark Jones and I were sitting at the bar, talking about this Pluto in Capricorn, and it was earlier on then, it was several years ago. And I had said to him, I said, well, of course, astrology needs to go back to go forward, right? We know that cardinal signs often need to, especially Cancer and Capricorn, regress to progress, right? And Capricorn, especially Pluto and Capricorn, is a classic signature for that. So we saw that happening collectively a lot. That's what this retrograde, kind of going back to the 1950s with black and white TV and women were pregnant in the kitchen, and you know, this, you know, in the US at least, right? This is the ideology that they've been clinging on to since Pluto went into Capricorn, that somehow we can bring back the good old days, you know? when everybody but white men knew their place. But anyway, so I think astrology has had also this necessary regression back to its roots to move it forward. And so I think it is interesting to see the younger astrologers doing that. I mean, it's quite fascinating to do that. And then to see where that's going to go with Pluto going into Aquarius. So Pluto going into Aquarius, you know, can go a couple different ways, right? It can technologize astrology even more, which is, of course, we're talking about the use of AI and then yeah. So that could actually degrade our art, our art and science. But as we also know, Aquarius as an archetype also rules the higher sciences too. You know, that so there can be, I think, new applications of astrology in the way that it can be broken down through that observation correlation, right, that works with that archetype of Aquarius. So it can be broader and it can be broadcast more, right? And it can, so technology can also expand it. But within the professional realms of astrology, I think that there's a, I mean, I just lectured at NORWAC about this. I gave the keynote on where are our roots? Like, so yes, there is the Hellenistic and the classical of astrology as we know it today, but that's not the first time humankind was looking up at the sky and making correlations, right? And that connection, even though it wasn't horoscopic astrology as we know it today, that connection, that the fact that the real connection of as above, so below, as within, so without, right? That was known by what I call our archaic ancestral consciousness, when we go back to Neolithic or Neanderthal consciousness, that that consciousness is very different than ours. And I think that astrology can also recapture some of that root. And that root is recaptured by imagination, right? That root is captured by allowing, you know, not trying to hammer astrology into a scientific model or mold, because who freaking cares? You know, I know there are astrologers out there that just like really hammer away at the institutions and trying to get astrology to fit here and there. You know, it works on a principle of synchronicity. It works on a principle of meaning. It's a subjective and objective experience. And all science is going to do is look at the objective, but not the subjective, right? It's like psychology. Psychology is a science, sort of, you know, because they can codify certain things, but they still can't explain consciousness. So, you know, my point is astrology is kind of in that place. And I think that there's a possibility. I also see possibilities, again, positive and negative. Pluto going into Aquarius, it could be more fragmentation within the community, right? Little tribes breaking off and throwing stones at each other. That's always been part of the professional astrology world. Or you can see more collaboration, right? You could see more cross of, oh, I'll take some of this and this, and, you know, more collective collaboration or appreciation of, excuse me, what we're doing collectively as astrologers.
And or a little bit of both.
Excuse me, yeah.
Yeah.
Got you all choked up, huh? We got you talking a lot.
I know. Well, you know, I do have a Gemini moon.
Me too.
And
After so, yeah.
in Sag, right? So yeah, I always say, drop a quarter in me, and I'll tell you everything I know.
Only a quarter?
So
Wow.
I know. I should up that.
Yeah.
Do we make it lighter, Sue?
Sure.
Your
yeah.
favorite question?
Yeah.
Your favorite question?
Okay, so what do you do in your spare time?
Make podcasts, learn new things, go camping, take a walk with my dog, hang with my partner. I'm going to the Outer Banks soon, hang on the beach. A lot of my free time, or what's rejuvenating to me, is nature. You know, like I don't spend a lot of time doing. I don't spend a lot of time doing things just to do things. I mean, really, I don't, right? You know, so some people have said to me, you know, I remember years ago when I was dating, and people would say, well, what do you do for fun? And I would literally have to think in my mind, I'm living my life's work, which is bliss. Like, fun isn't even part of the equation. I mean, it's like, it's so beyond that, you know what I mean?
It's all
To
fun.
live your passion, like to be able to really, you know, experience and live your passion. So again, my spare time a lot is, you know, catching up on world events or reading up on things or being out in nature somewhere. I've done so much traveling too. So it's not like I'm certainly, if I hadn't done that earlier in my life, I'd be like, I need to be getting on a plane and going somewhere with all that Sag energy. But I did it for 30 years. I've been all over, you know, I've traveled for work and then lecturing and then teaching. And I mean, I am still doing it. I'm going to Australia in January, and I still do that, but I'm more selective because I used to just live on planes, you know? Like literally, I mean, I've done some trips where I was like lecturing in Canada, and then I'd stop in Seattle, and then I went to Australia, and then I literally did one circuit. It was like a month and a half trip where I started in Canada and then went to Seattle and then did Australia and then did Serbia and then did London and then came home.
Round the world tour.
I mean, I've done all that. You know, I lived in Europe for several years, so I've also seen a lot of Europe too. Again, there are places I'd still like to go, but it's not the big urge.
Well, I'm going to ask a question that's going back a little bit to your past lives. This is something I'm intrigued with. I'm very fascinated with past lives and experiences in the now. Has there been a country that you've been to where there's just a country that you remember that you've been to where the experience of being just a recognition or like a remembrance of I've been on this land?
Oh, I've had complete recalls.
Right.
Germany was one. The crossing the Ponte Vecchio in Florence was another. Like my body just transformed into like Renaissance clothes. I went, oh my God, what's here, right? India. When I first went to India, the plane's wheels touched the ground. I burst into tears and just started crying on the plane saying, oh my God, I'm home.
Oh, wow.
And I've always had amazing, in fact, I've had a lot of, speaking of, you know, predictive astrology, Vedic astrology, especially the real pundits in India are just amazing with their readings. And I went to some that did what's called those Shukanadi leaves. Have you ever heard of those?
My sister had it done.
Did she? Yes, I had that done. And they're like, you have amazing karma in India. And I'm like, I know, because like every time I go there, it's like just like I just love it, even though it's such a country of contrast and it can be such a hard country. You know,
I'm Indian ethnicity, and I've not been to where my parents are from yet, but I've been to India twice, and for me it was just chaos. And I can speak the language, I can get by, but I was just like, get me out. But I know there's still a pull, but for me, it's not the time. I feel like it's not the time. It will come. I know
What area were you from, or have you been there?
My parents are from North India, so the Punjab.
Okay.
The Punjabi, and so they go back every year to stay for a while and then come back to England. but the pull to Punjab hasn't been there for me yet. Mumbai was more for like watching Indian films and Bollywood. That was a whole different ball game. But I haven't been back to India since 2008. And but I know the timing, it's the timing, and something will pull me there. There's just been other places I've been drawn to. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean when it comes to India, in terms of, I know there's a link somewhere, past lives as well as this current lifetime. But yeah, I'm just fascinated when you
Well,
go to
it's your
certain lands.
ancestral root, so there is that pull, as well as, like you said, past lives. And certainly certain places, I mean, Germany was horrific for me. I don't ever want to go to Egypt, and now I know why from the lives I had there.
Okay.
There's certain places, and Sue knows that we do some exercises in the trainings where people imagine themselves going around the world while they're guided, looking down at countries, and get a feeling like yes or no, or oh my God, I'd never go there. Egypt has always had like a big X on the map for me. Never want to go there. I've had several horrible past lives there. So yes, we can absolutely get triggered in positive ways and negative ways geographically by going to a place. And sometimes, the coincidences and synchronicities that happen, especially if you're open to, downloading that kind of information, is quite amazing.
Yeah. And that's the key word, being open to it. I feel you have to allow it in. Yeah. Otherwise, those blocks can stay up, and it's just being open. Like you said, synchronicity, coincidences, there's a link. There's always a link.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, before we head towards closing, I have one final question for you, Patricia. Personal interest in books. I absolutely love reading. I do have Neptune in the third house squaring my nodes, so I'm always going to devour whatever spiritual information I can find. Apart from astrology books, has there been any particular book that's inspired you, or books in your life that you recommend?
If I could, you pick up the camera and show you my office. It's
like all of us, yeah, I'm sure.
I used my house. I pared down a lot because I moved several times. In this last move, I literally pared down more than half of the books that I have had, donated them. But well, like I mentioned, for me, Seth and the Jane Roberts books were just foundational. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the New Age movement really came out of Theosophy and Seth. I mean, Seth was the one who said you create your own reality, right? So this whole New Age thought, is, and then he wrote a book about how you do it, right? I mean, people never read that, but that's the part of Seth that caught on. And I'm not saying it for the New Age value, because I don't know if I necessarily value that so much as his that work was really felt very authentic to me, not like, some person channeling their own higher self and not knowing and calling it Ramtha or whatever. Oops, did I just say that? My outside voice, those kinds of channels. So yeah, Seth, and of course, like I mentioned, the Alice Bailey books, Theosophy, it's very dense though for people. Psychology, of course, I've read a lot of that. Like The Great Cosmic Mother is a great one. That was kind of foundational in my reclaiming my feminine, my divine feminine, my natural feminine, that was very foundational for me. I don't know, there's so many of them, but I mean, I think, you could kind of put them like my interests in different categories. So it would be I really love a lot of the, like, that kind of mystery, like understanding earlier civilizations. I love that stuff. Marie Gimbutas, I love her. Joseph Campbell, I loved his study of, the monomyth of the hero story. Although that was very patriarchal. The heroine's journey, he forgot that there was one of those. I love studying ancient myths. I have a fascination with Sumeria. So I love stuff around that. Yeah.
Wow. Well, we can provide some links for the audience for these particular books. I have actually got The Cosmic Mother. I haven't started reading it yet, but I remember picking it up a few months ago. Might even been last year actually. But yeah, books teach. There's so much to learn and there's so much growth. But yeah, so I think books can change people's lives, especially the people that are interested in reading.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, and Other Lives, Other Selves by Roger Woolger. That one changed my life.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Mine too.
Yeah.
That's what got me to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it got us all to assist our own soul's evolution, right? I mean,
Yeah.
to have these methods that can go that deep, that fast, that far, for people who are interested in spiritual psychology and their soul's evolution. Yes.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Oh, Patricia, this has been so much fun. Thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much for
you.
joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I didn't bring coffee, but I'm glad I had the water though, because I needed it.
Yeah. Yeah, and my coffee still sits here.
Mine's a ginger tea because it's too late for me to be having coffee at this time.
Well, it would be way too late for you there. Yeah.
Well, we look forward to your podcast, and we will definitely put a link to that when you have it ready. We will put a link in the EA Zoom meetings group, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
nice to meet you, Rob. We haven't met before, but
No,
keep up the
likewise.
good work.
Thank you.
All right.